Our scripture this morning comes from Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 1. It says, "Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, 'Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly.' They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth.' But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower and the people were building. And the Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their languages so they will not understand each other.' So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." This is the word of the Lord.
So in our family, this Thanksgiving, we switched things up a little bit. Instead of having our normal traditional Thanksgiving meal on Thursday, we moved it to Friday because my wife, Elena, had this great idea of us joining together the 6 members of our family that can cook, right? Simon and Sadie, they're 5 years old. They're not quite there yet, right? And to divide us up into teams and to have a game day food cook-off to get ready for the wretched Cowboy game that it was, right? And so I'm like, okay, let's give something new a try, right? And I didn't think through this quite well enough, but I said, okay. And so Elena divided us up into teams, and I got teamed up with my man, Sam. And like, Sam, we're going to do this. We're going to win, right? Because we all want to win. That's Nacho Libre talk, if anybody doesn't know Nacho Libre. You need to know, do yourself a favor over the holiday season and watch Nacho Libre. You will be blessed. Right, Becky? Right. And so we get teamed up, and Sam's excited, and I find this recipe that we'd never tried before. It was a sausage, bacon, stuffed puff pastry. Are you with me yet? It's like, oh, it's going to be awesome. And so I read over the recipe not very well because I'm like, I'll read over more fully the day of whenever we need to be prepared. And I forgot, our house is chaotic as it is, but when we're all together, the chaos factor really, really shoots through the roof. And I was just doing all that I could, right, to get Sam involved and to concentrate on cooking this amazing dish. And one of the things that you needed to do is you needed to mix the cooked bacon together with the raw sausage, and that was going to go inside the puff pastry, and it was going to cook. Well, the first rule of cooking, right? Well, one of the first rules of cooking, if you're going to stuff something raw, you need to cook it first to taste it to make sure the seasoning is just perfect. I forgot to do that. I forgot to put the seasoning in the sausage, period. And it's like, and I even remembered, and I could have undone, and I even had to go back and undo the puff pastry because I forgot to see all this stuff I forgot to do. I forgot to put the egg wash around it and all this stuff. I could have re-seasoned it then, but I forgot again because of all of the chaos going on in our family, right? So I pull it out, y'all. It looks beautiful. It looked exactly like on the picture. And I take a bite before our judge. We actually got our neighbor, y'all, to come over and judge the food. And before our neighbor, and I'm like, I mean, it didn't taste awful, but my goal when I cook something is to cause people's eyes to roll into the back of their head and to say, oh, yes. There was no eye rolling with this stuff, let me tell you. And it was funny. Our neighbor, she was all excited. Her name was Mary. Our neighbor came over. She tasted Elena, and who cooked with you? Joey, see, I'm already forgetting. Joey, their dish, oh, it was great. It was amazing. Then Lily and Levi, they cooked this fried macaroni and cheese. Oh, man, it was really, really good. So Mary's all happy when she's eating these two dishes, and she gets to mine, and she takes a bite of it, and the other bite, she ate all of that. She takes a bite of mine, and she says, oh, that's great, and she sets the rest of it down. That's when you know that you have failed. And I was disappointed in myself. And disappointed that Sam and I could not come together just a little bit better and really get into the details of the recipe and not make a mistake. I felt scattered, right? How about y'all? Anything happen over Thanksgiving that made you feel scattered? Right? Well, today, as we jump into this series of sermons called Together Again, we're actually going to talk about the Christmas story in like even maybe a deeper sort of way than we've done before. Our commitment to you since September is to root all of our sermon series all the way back in the book of Genesis. Everything that the scripture is seeking to reveal and to unfold to us begins literally at the beginning. Especially in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, sets the stage for the rest, come on, of the story, right? And so we're going to, if there's three main stories in those first 11 chapters, they're these. The story of creation, right? The story of the flood. Can anybody get the third? Just look at the graphic on the screen. You see this tower reaching up into the sky, right? The Tower of Babel. That is the one story that we know the least about. And it is this story that kind of pushes God over the edge, you might say, to send his son Jesus, to take all that is scattered and messed up and ruined in the world, and to center us in his son, the Christ, the child, in order to bring us back together. The Tower of Babel is a story about pride and about arrogance, you might say, but there's so much more to the story than that. If you'll remember back, and one of the things that the story of the Tower of Babel is supposed to get you to do is to transport you back all the way to Genesis chapter 1, from chapter 11 to chapter 1, with this phrase, let us. Everyone, let us. Seems like a very benign phrase. But if you'll remember back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, this is what's going on as God is creating the heavens and the earth. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Wow. It is like this picture of beauty that God has infused into his creation, that he has placed us, humans, in the center. He's created us in his image. Now, to be created in the image of God means that we will bear God's name and that we will reflect God's character out into the world. It's like in this sentence here, like our purpose is delivered to us, that we reflect God's character. Boom. Remember, I'll talk about the big five. Boom. That God is what? Gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love, and come on, faithful. Those are the big five. I think I'll wear y'all out with this, right? That's the big five. And that is supposed to consume us. That way of reflecting those characteristics out into the world by the way we live and arrange our life, this is what we're made for in God's image And we're made to rule. We're not comfortable with this. But we're made to be partners with God and with each other to rule over the world. Let us, God says. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you might say. All of that God is. Let us do this. Create these partners that we can be in relationship with to reflect our character, to rule over the world with us. Fast forward to Genesis chapter 11 at the Tower of Babel. Now remember, this happens in the east. Like there's this slow float in Genesis 1 through 11. This slow float to the east. East of where? Well, biblically speaking, the east is always east of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is literally the center of the world. Now, I talk about Tulia, Texas, my hometown, being the center of the world. That's not Jerusalem. So when they talk about the east, it's east of Jerusalem. And so that is where the Garden of Eden, God planted the Garden of Eden. It is on the east side of Eden that God established a gate with the cherubim and the swords flashing back and forth to keep the humans from entering the garden again. Cain, the third human, Cain heads east and is wandering in the east in the land of Nod. People keep moving further eastward of Eden, and they get to this place called Shinar, or Babylonia, right? And it is there that they find this plain, and they begin to build a city. Biblically speaking, the east, when ancient Israelites thought of the east, that is where their enemies came from. The worst of their enemies came from the east. Nothing good came from the east. That is where bad things happened. And this is what those who were building this city, building this tower, they said, "Come, let us." You get it? You get the connection back to Genesis 1? Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. Now, this is the kicker. So that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered all over the face of the whole earth. So just pause there for a second. There is a lot of motivation that these people that have drifted to the east have to build this city and to build this tower. The motivation is that they are experiencing shame. Remember, we talk about shame regularly around here, that shame says you do not belong and you have no purpose. You ever feel like that? You ever feel like you don't belong and you don't really have a purpose, you haven't found your purpose in the world? And that is why they say, let us make a name for ourselves, forgetting the fact that they had already been given a name. Their name was human. Their name was partner. Their name was in the image of God. Whoa, that's big stuff, right? And yet they'd forgotten it. And so because we have to have something to root our life in, they went about seeking to achieve something, to build themselves up so that they would have a place. I have a name, and I am accomplishing things, and I am going to keep myself and others around me that I care about safe, because that's the second motivation, is they were afraid. Sometimes we react and respond out of fear, and that fear is a healthy fear. But when we react and respond out of persistent, ongoing fear, you can be sure you're going down a wrong path. They were afraid because they had this impulse within them, because they were made in God's image, right? And they're made for unity. They had this impulse in them that they had to hold it together. That they can't be protected from violence unless they are together. It's what the rabbis talked about, the Tower of Babel, that the mortar that held the Tower of Babel together was violence. Because as you read through the story backwards, right, it is violence that breaks out, beginning with Cain and Lamech, and in the days of Noah, it is violence that is causing the world to fall apart. And it's interesting that God comes down and sees that as they say, let us, that us was only them, and that us did not include God. Babel literally means God's gate. That they were literally in this plain of Shinar. They could not get back into the Garden of Eden on their own terms. So they're like, to heck with that garden, we're going to build a city. And the city is going to be beautiful, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to cause us to have a name and a purpose, and we're not going to be afraid because we're in this city. And God in his mercy, I want you to hear this, God in his mercy does not allow it. God will not persistently allow us to arrange our life in such a ways that will completely destroy us. But he will intervene so that we can come to this realization that we need him. And so he does this work of messing with the way that they spoke to one another so that they were scattered. Isn't it interesting? The very thing that they feared, because they did it on their terms, they got scattered anyway because of God's mercy. Because God will never let us take our destiny in our own hands forever. So at the beginning of the service, I asked you to ponder ways in which that you feel like you are scattered. I certainly felt scattered Thursday whenever I was trying to cook that food. No doubt about it. That was just kind of a fun thing. But like deep in your soul, is there a place that you don't know who you are anymore? You see, we can get scattered relationally. That there can become deep disagreements between people on how the world works relative to our desires, that we get scattered. That instead of being people who reflect those big five things back into the lives of other people, we are people that reach out and grab people by the collar, both literally and figuratively, and ask them, beg them, demand that they get in line with us. This leads to a locational, it's not even a word, but a locational scattering. Whenever we can't get our own way with others, and so we begin to step back. And while we step back, we point and we blame. They are the problem. And this leads to a scattering in purpose. We're made to reflect God's image. We're made to rule over the earth, and we don't know who we are anymore. And we think our purpose is something else, and we go out and try to make a name for ourselves. And then we get scattered in our own hearts and our own minds. And we get confused about who we truly are in God's presence, in the world that he has us in. And it leads to this mortar of violence that the rabbi talks about. Violence, verbal, physical abuse, whether it's just small or very large, this is where it leads to. Think about it. The Tower of Babel was this group of people's attempt to create a utopia without God. You know what happens when people try to do that? Well, the last 100 and so years is good evidence that communism and socialism are attempts to build up a utopia without God. And would you be surprised to hear that those regimes in the world have led to the murder of about 97 million people? That's what happens when we try to build up the world without God. So during this global pandemic that we have found ourselves in, would you agree that we have experienced our fair share of scattering from one another, like politically? Just as Americans, it's like, who are we anymore, right? Land of the free, home of the brave. I thought that's who we were, and we've forgotten who we are. Now, we might think that the pandemic caused us to lose our way. Not so. Sure, some of it has caused the scattering, but really, the vast majority of the scattering that the pandemic has brought about has been more revealing of who we already were before the pandemic ever hit. That it has been more revealing about our already scattered and disconnected lives. And now, here it comes. Omicron is on the way. Like, you know that they're naming these variants out of Greek letters? Heck, I thought Omicron, growing up, was the name of my mom's study club. The Omicron Study Club of Tulia, Texas, right? You know anything, have any idea what that's what it means? It's a Greek letter. Who would have ever thought that what I associated with my mom's study club and us having to deep clean the house every other year? I hated it so much. Had to be perfect. And that it's about another wave of this pain. Where will we be? How will we react? How will we respond when Omicron shows up to Midland? Right? The Bible teaches us that God scatters us as an act of mercy to save us from us trying to save and unify ourselves without God. But Babel also teaches us that God will never give up. That's when you turn the page to chapter 12 of Genesis, the trajectory of the world begins to change when God calls this guy named Abraham. And this Abraham, after many, many generations, leads to the coming of Jesus. Ephesians 1:10 says this, do you believe it? That it is God's purpose to bring unity to all things in heaven and on earth under Christ. Note the word under. The Tower of Babel builders were all about the over. And the vision that God has for our lives is always a vision of being under. And as the people scattered at Babel, the prophets began to get on board with this renewed vision that God has for humans. Both in Isaiah chapter 2, and you can write these down to go check them later, but they're just such powerful passages. Isaiah chapter 2 and Micah chapter 4, verbatim, the same things. As the Dawsons read to us when they lit the Advent wreath, Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. In the last days, and brothers and sisters, These are the last days. Now, the last days spread out for a long time, but we are living into the reality of this now. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. Not something that we can do by creating a Tower of Babel, but something that God does. It will be exalted above the hills. And get this, all nations will stream to it. Not just a few, not just the Jews, but all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, are you ready? Pull up to your seat. Many peoples will come and say, come, let us. In your mind, when you read that, let us here, is to take you back to Babel. And then to take you back to Genesis 1. Come, let us go to the mountain of who? The Lord, Yahweh. Not a mountain of our own making, but the place where God reaches down and touches the earth. To the temple of the God of Jacob. Listen to this. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his path. The law will go out. Teaching will go out from Zion. The word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Wow. And as the prophets heard from God, and as prophets shared this back with the people, it was very, very hard for them to believe it or to trust it, that all nations would come. And then we get to the book of Matthew. How many of you put up your Christmas decorations over the weekend? You're ready to go, you're full speed ahead. How many of you have a nativity scene amongst your Christmas decorations? Yeah. And how many of you have in that nativity scene the magi or the wise men? Yeah, right. Do y'all know where those guys were from? The East. The East, sorry. The East. What do Israelites think of when they think of the East? My enemies. Somebody's coming after me. Oh, but these guys aren't coming to attack. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, magi, wise men, teachers, priests from the east came to Jerusalem. It's what the prophet said would happen, right? And asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. Wow. These people, probably a lot more than 3, by the way, these people had come to grips that something was wrong. And that the way that they were ordering and arranging their life in the East was no good. And they were looking and hoping that something would be revealed in the stars that would turn this around. And they saw the star, and they came from the East to Jerusalem so that they could worship the King. The word that Matthew uses there is prokuneo, which means they came to prostrate themselves, to kneel down in an act of reverence and submission. So do you see? The builders of the Tower of Babel, they were all about reaching to the heights. And because of that project was bankrupt, these magi from the east, they come and they bow themselves low and seek to worship the King. Brothers and sisters, I want you to ponder this as you think about these last 21 months and the potential of it just continuing on. Hope to God, no, but hey, we've been through this before, right? Languishing. Does that relate to you? Do you feel like you're just languishing in life? To languish means that we say that we are victimized by our circumstances. And we really have two choices when we give in to the languishing. We can give up and just say, this is the way that it is. Or that we can take the world by the throat and try to strangle the life out of it so that we can live the life that we want. We can give up or we can fight. We can give in to fear and give in to shame. That is languishing. Or, like the wise men, is there a longing in you? A longing for something greater, a longing for something new, a longing for life on our planet to be different and new. To long for something means that we are aware of our circumstances, like the wise men were aware that things were not all that they should be where they were in the East. Aware of our circumstances. And we choose to move. Reaching for the hand of God as we choose to make this movement downward to worship the one who is our King. So, in what ways do you feel scattered? In light of those ways that you feel scattered, are you languishing or are you longing? I want you to bow your heads. God, I pray that you will give us the courage to be honest with ourselves. Lord, I pray that you will help us to stop pointing fingers. And instead, just like the wise men came, I pray that you will help us to reach out our hand to you. And Lord, as we begin to prepare our hearts for a grand Christmas celebration, Lord, help us not to be in a hurry. And help us not to allow this season to flit by with us not realizing that the disunity and the scattered and the broken parts of our world, that you have a vision that they will be all brought back together. And Lord, I pray that as we reach out for your hand and as we humble ourselves, that you'll help us to see our place and not only allowing you to touch our hearts and unify us, but that you'll help us to see that those who are broken out there can be healed and restored because of the Jesus that they experience in us. So God, gather up our circumstances. Help us to see them as longings that you and your Son can heal. Let's stand and sing. Brothers and sisters, let's share in our mantra together. You can follow along from the screen. Remember, the secret is simply this: Christ in me, yes, Christ in me, bringing with him the hope of all the glorious things to come, and may we be covered in the dust of our Rabbi. Now everyone look right up here and receive this blessing from the Father's heart to yours. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace, both now and forever. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And everyone said, Sola, Sancta, Caritas, go in peace.